My name is Ophelia Graves. I'm 34 years old, and until this spring, I believe stability wasn't something you stumbled into. It was something you built, carefully, quietly, without leaving cracks that could collapse later. That belief shaped everything: my work, my routines, my relationships, especially my judgment. Or at least, I thought it did. Daniel Carter was 31. We had been together a little over 4 years, engaged for 11 months, living in Denver, Colorado, in a condo I bought long before I met him. The mortgage was mine, the keys were mine, the life inside it I thought was ours. From the outside, we made sense. We had rhythm, structure, the kind of relationship people point to when they say, "That's going somewhere." Daniel had a kind of quiet charm that didn't demand attention, but somehow always held it anyway. In the beginning, it felt easy, natural. He believed in things I didn't: timing, signs, meaning in coincidences. At first, it was harmless. He said it was destiny that we met, because it rained the night of our first date and I had mentioned liking storms. He said it was fate that the dog we adopted leaned into both of us at the shelter like it had chosen us. He made ordinary things feel significant, and I let him. But somewhere between engagement photos and vendor deposits, that belief stopped being charming and started becoming an excuse. If he forgot something important, maybe the universe was slowing him down. If he changed his mind after we'd already paid for something, maybe it wasn't inconsistency. Maybe it was alignment. If I asked a direct question, suddenly I was resisting the flow. I remember one Sunday afternoon sitting at the kitchen island, spreadsheets open, comparing transportation packages for the wedding. Daniel was on the couch, scrolling through videos about soul ties and divine timing. I should have seen it then, but I didn't. The wedding was set for May, a venue just outside Boulder. We had already paid the non-refundable hold fee, deposits on catering, invitations halfway designed. Everything was moving forward, except him. The breakup happened on a Thursday night in late October. A small Italian restaurant in Cherry Creek. He called it a reset dinner. That should have warned me. He barely touched his food, just pushed pasta around his plate, eyes unfocused, like he was rehearsing something in his head. Then he looked at me with that soft, careful expression people wear when they want credit for the pain they're about to cause. "I think we rushed this," he said. I didn't react right away, just set my fork down and asked, "You mean the wedding date?" He shook his head slowly. No, us. 4 years, reduced to a feeling. I didn't interrupt him. I've learned that when people decide to become the main character in their own disaster, they usually can't stop narrating. He said he loved me, but things felt too decided, too locked in, too real. He said maybe we forced the timeline because it looked right on paper. He said, sometimes people need space to understand if love is real, or just comfort. And then he gave me the line I think I'll remember for the rest of my life. If we're destiny, I'll find my way back. He said it like it meant something, like it was wise, like it was noble. Like he wasn't just asking me to stay exactly where I was while he walked away to test whether something better existed. I looked at him for maybe 2 seconds and said, "Don't." He blinked. "What do you mean, don't?" "I mean, don't come back to check if I'm still here." He laughed lightly, like I was overreacting. "Ophelia, that's not what I'm saying." It was exactly what he was saying. He just wanted prettier language around it. I asked him one thing. "Is there someone else?" He hesitated, just long enough. "Not exactly." That was enough. Not official, but imagined. Possibility always comes before replacement. I reached for my card, placed it on the table, and stood up. "Wait, that's it?" he asked. "You said you need space," I replied calmly. "Take all of it." And I left. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. That's how I knew. If you still want to fix something, your body fights you. Mine didn't. When I got back to the condo, I didn't sit down. Didn't think. Didn't hesitate. I walked straight into the guest room and pulled 2 empty suitcases out of the closet. Daniel arrived about 40 minutes later. He walked in, saw the suitcases, and froze. "Ophelia, stop. You're acting like I cheated." I zipped one open and looked at him. "No," I said evenly. "I'm acting like you ended our engagement and expect me to stay here while you figure out if I'm still your best option." He followed me from room to room, talking in circles. "I'm overwhelmed. I just need clarity. That's why I said space." I didn't answer. "You always make everything so final," he added, frustration creeping into his voice. "It's not over if it's meant to be." That almost made me smile. I stopped folding his shirts and turned to him. "Are you leaving because you want to leave?" I asked quietly, "or because you expect me to wait?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence is an answer. I walked past him into the bedroom, opened his side of the closet, and started packing. Shirts, jackets, shoes. Systematic, clean. He stood there, watching, like he was waiting for me to break. When I didn't, something in his expression shifted. Not regret. Not yet. Surprise. Like consequences had arrived faster than expected. By the time I carried the first suitcase to the front door, his eyes were wet. Not because he was losing me, because he wasn't ready to lose control. Around midnight, he called his friend and asked if he could stay there a few nights. A few nights. Like this was temporary. Like I was temporary. While he packed, I sat at the kitchen counter and started sending emails. Venue. Caterer. Florist. Photographer. By the time I was done, I had stopped nearly $10,000 in future payments. We still lost the initial deposits, but not everything. Not me. When he came downstairs, he was wearing one of my old hoodies, carrying an overnight bag, and the engagement ring box. He set it on the counter carefully, like it was something fragile, like it still meant something. "I thought you knew me better than this," he said quietly. I didn't look at it. "I did," I replied. "That's why I'm not negotiating." He stood there, waiting. For a crack, for hesitation, for proof that I would stay exactly where he left me. When it didn't come, he picked up his bag and walked toward the door. Then he paused, turned back. "When you calm down," he said softly, "you'll understand this wasn't goodbye. It was a test." Something in me settled completely. Final. I met his eyes. "Love isn't a test," I said. "You don't leave someone to grade alone." He left. At 12:08 a.m., my phone lit up. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just need to listen to my instincts." I stared at the message for a moment, then replied once. Then listened to them somewhere else. That night, I changed the access code to the garage, removed his fingerprint from the front lock, moved the ring box into my safe, and sat alone in the kitchen, holding a drink I didn't even want. The condo was quiet, not peaceful, not yet. But underneath the anger, underneath the embarrassment, there was something else, something steady, clarity. By noon the next day, I had told my mother the wedding was off. She was quiet for half a second, which for her counted as emotional restraint, then said, "Do you need me to come down to Denver?" "No," I said. "I need you not to say, 'I told you so,' even if you're tempted." She exhaled softly through her nose. "I wasn't going to say it." "You were absolutely going to say it." "I was," she admitted, "but I'm choosing growth." That made me smile for the first time in nearly 24 hours. After that, the logistics took over. I called my friend Miles and asked if he could help me move the larger boxes Daniel had left behind into storage until he arranged pickup. I spoke to the building manager and let him know Daniel was no longer authorized to enter the condo without my approval. Since the place was mine and Daniel's name wasn't attached to the mortgage, the parking permit, or the resident access file, that part was simple. Simple. I remember thinking that word with a kind of bitter gratitude, because almost nothing about ending a 4-year relationship is simple, except paperwork. By evening, the texts started arriving in waves. "I love you. I just need time. You're punishing me for being honest. You're making this uglier than it has to be. Please don't tell people yet. My mom thinks I'm staying with my friend because we had a fight." That one almost impressed me. Not because it was convincing, because it was so transparent. He didn't just want space. He wanted narrative control. He wanted time to tell the story first, soften the edges, rearrange the facts until his exit sounded spiritual instead of selfish. I didn't respond. Saturday morning, he sent, "I know you still feel this too." I looked at the message for maybe 5 seconds and realized something simple. I didn't. Not the way he meant. I felt hurt, humiliated, angry in that cold, exacting way anger shows up when it stops being explosive and starts becoming useful. But longing? No. That part had gone quiet faster than I expected. The first 2 months after Daniel moved out were strange in a way I still find difficult to explain. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just cleaner. There was grief, yes, but it was grief without confusion. He had not been taken from me. He had stepped away from something real and expected me to preserve it in glass until he decided whether he wanted it back. That knowledge made mourning easier. I stopped checking my phone for his name after the first week. I returned sample linens we'd stored in the hall closet. I boxed the wedding magazines. I moved the extra dining chairs we had borrowed from my aunt back into my friend's truck and drove them to her garage myself because I didn't want one more object in my home waiting for a future that no longer existed. The refund emails trickled in slowly. Some partial, some final, some impossible. The venue hold fee was gone. The invitation design fee was gone. A few smaller deposits came back after cancellation windows I barely made by hours. Every number irritated me, but not nearly as much as the thought of how much more expensive it would have been to marry a man who called indecision destiny. Daniel, meanwhile, tried a different strategy. At first, he disappeared, or at least performed disappearance. He posted vague stories about transformation, timing, becoming who you were always meant to be. Rooftop bars, weekend drives to Scottsdale, a carefully framed picture of a woman's hand holding a drink beside his. Nothing explicit, just enough implication to travel. I wouldn't have known if mutual friends hadn't started sending screenshots with the kind of messages people think are helpful. Just so you know, this is weird, right? Do you think he's trying to get your attention? I never answered those either. Not because I was above it, because I knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted me watching. He wanted me wondering whether I had moved too fast, ended things too hard, failed some invisible test he had built in his own head. I refused the audition. Then, sometime around Christmas, the tone shifted. The rooftop photos stopped. The captions got sadder. Suddenly, everything was about losing what had been written for you because you were too stubborn to recognize the signs. Apparently, freedom had become less glamorous once it came with bills, routine, and the kind of ordinary Tuesdays that no longer had my condo, my structure, or my reliability built into them. That was when the flying monkeys arrived. First, his friend Nate texted me from a number I didn't know, saying Daniel had made a mistake but was finally ready to have an adult conversation. Then his cousin Elise sent me a message on LinkedIn, which I found irritating enough to laugh at, telling me she had a feeling I would regret missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture, apparently, was that Daniel had needed to leave me in order to realize I was the one. I ignored both. Then he started appearing in places he had no reason to be. My coffee shop in Reno, the grocery store near my building, a used bookstore in Capitol Hill that he had once mocked for smelling like dust and dead people. Every time, the same performance. A small surprised smile. A soft laugh. Wow, what are the odds? Not high. Not unless someone was manufacturing them. By then, my life had started moving. Not dramatically. Quietly. In ways that felt healthy instead of theatrical. I joined a Saturday climbing group mostly because one of my coworkers insisted it would be good for me to leave the condo and do something that required my full attention. She was right. Rock climbing doesn't leave much room for emotional spiraling. Either you trust your grip or you don't. I started sleeping better. I stopped replaying the restaurant conversation in my head every night. In January, I got promoted to senior logistics lead. The raise didn't erase the financial sting of the canceled wedding, but it made the losses feel less like damage and more like a fee for exiting something before it became a legal contract and a lifelong regret. My mother mailed me a card after I told her about the promotion. Inside, she had written in blue ink, "Better a lost venue fee than a lost decade." I kept that card. It sat on the kitchen counter for months. And then there was Aiden. I met him through the climbing group. He was 30, a trauma nurse at a hospital in Aurora. Funny in that unforced way that never sounded like performance. The kind of man who answered direct questions with direct answers and never seemed to need mystery to feel interesting. The first time we talked for more than a few minutes, we were sitting on a padded bench near the wall, unlacing our shoes after a climb. He asked, "Do you always look that calm while doing something mildly dangerous?" I glanced over at him. "Do I?" "Either that," he said, "or you're very committed to not letting gravity win in public." I laughed, a real one. It surprised me. We got coffee after the next climb, then tacos the week after that, then dinner. Nothing rushed, nothing hidden, nothing performative. Just easy. And easy, after Danielle, felt almost suspicious. Not because it lacked depth, because I had gotten too used to intensity pretending to be meaning. With Aiden, there were no speeches about fate. No carefully curated silences designed to make me chase clarity. No emotional riddles wrapped in spiritual language. If he liked me, he acted like it. If he had a question, he asked it. If he made a plan, he kept it. The first time I noticed how deeply that steadiness affected me, we were walking back to our cars after dinner one night, and he said, "I had a good time. I'd like to see you again. Are you free Thursday?" No game. No vagueness. No testing whether I would read hidden meaning into his tone. Just honesty. I stood there for half a second longer than necessary and realized how tired I had been. Not physically. Emotionally. Tired of translating. Tired of waiting for the other layer under the sentence. Tired of loving someone who always seemed to need a dramatic sky behind every choice. Aiden touched my elbow lightly and asked, "Too direct?" "No," I said, "probably too quickly." Actually, that's kind of perfect. I hadn't posted him anywhere. Hadn't told many people. Partly because it was new, partly because I had no interest in turning something good into a public statement. But Denver is not a large city when the wrong person is determined enough. 3 nights ago, I came home from work and stepped off the elevator to find Daniel sitting on the floor outside my condo door. He was wearing an old University of Colorado hoodie of mine and holding the framed photo from our engagement shoot in Estes Park. His knees were drawn up, shoulders slightly hunched, head tilted just enough to look wounded in the most photogenic way possible. For a moment, I just stood there, still, taking in the image. He rose too fast when he saw me, like he had been rehearsing the moment and missed his cue by half a second. "Ophelia," he said, breath-catching. "Finally." I stayed where I was. "What are you doing here?" He lifted the framed photo slightly, as if it explained anything. "I think we both know this was never supposed to end like this." My first emotion wasn't sadness. It was fury. Not loud fury. The kind that goes cold immediately. "The front desk should never have let you up," I said. He actually had the nerve to smile, faint and tired, like we were still in some story where his persistence counted as romance. "I followed a resident in," he said. "I know that sounds bad, but I just needed you to hear me." There it was. That little tilt. The confession shaped as justification. I walked closer but stopped several feet away. "You need to leave." Instead, he stepped toward me and started talking faster, voice soft and urgent. He said he had taken the space he needed. He said going out with other people had only clarified what we had. He said every road had led him back to me. He said maybe the pain had been part of the design, because some people only understand love once they almost lose it. That line must have sounded incredible in his head. I stared at him and asked, "Did you really come here to tell me you had to sample alternatives before life confirmed I was your best option?" His eyes filled immediately. "No, Ophelia, that's not fair." It was perfectly fair. And in that moment, looking at him, standing outside the home he had chosen to walk away from, still expecting emotional access, just because he had returned with prettier language, I understood something I wish I had understood much earlier. He had never wanted freedom. He had wanted a safety net, a door he could reopen with the right speech, a life kept warm in his absence. I took out my phone. His expression changed. "Who are you texting?" "Security," I said. That was when his voice sharpened. Just slightly. Just enough to show the panic under the heartbreak. "Seriously? You're going to do that to me?" I looked at him steadily. "No," I said. "I'm going to do that for me." Security arrived faster than he expected. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was the shift in his face when he realized this wasn't a conversation he could steer anymore. "Ophelia, don't do this," he said, voice tightening just enough to crack the calm he had been performing. "We can talk. Just 5 minutes." I didn't move. "I gave you 4 years," I replied. "You used your 5 minutes." The security guard stepped between us politely but firmly and asked Daniel to leave. For a moment he didn't. He just stood there, looking at me like he was waiting for me to override reality for him. When I didn't, something colder replaced the desperation. "You're choosing pride over what we had," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "No, I'm choosing peace over someone who treats me like a waiting room." That landed. You could see it, not as understanding, as injury. He left the photo frame leaning against the wall outside my door. I threw it away the next morning. I didn't think that would be the end of it, but I underestimated how deeply he believed his own narrative. The next morning, flowers arrived at my office. Not roses, white lilies, funeral flowers. The receptionist handed them to me, with an expression that hovered somewhere between concern and curiosity. There's a card," she said. I already knew there would be. For the woman I was always meant to come back to. "Love finds its way. Daniel." I stared at the handwriting for a long moment, not because it moved me, because it irritated me. Even now, he was positioning himself as the one returning, the one completing a story that I had supposedly interrupted. I took a photo of the arrangement, emailed it to myself, and asked building security to log the delivery along with the card. Then I had the flowers sent downstairs to the lobby desk of a nearby rehab center. I didn't want something that looked like grief sitting in my workspace. An hour later, an email came through from a new address. "You don't have to pretend with me. I know you still feel this." No greeting. No question. Just assumption. I forwarded it immediately to an attorney a friend had recommended after the condo incident. Her name was Rachel. She responded within 10 minutes. Short, direct. "People like this interpret silence as possibility. We need to close the door formally." By that afternoon, she had drafted a cease and desist. No direct contact. No gifts. No workplace visits. No appearances at my residence. All communication through legal counsel only. I read the document twice before sending it. Not because I doubted it, because something about formalizing the end of a relationship in legal language made it feel heavier than the breakup itself. But necessary doesn't always feel clean. Daniel ignored it, almost immediately. First, he contacted my mother. That part almost made me laugh. My mother is not the person you call when you need support for emotional theatrics. She is a retired school principal who has spent decades listening to excuses and reducing them to their actual meaning within minutes. Apparently, he told her I was spiraling, that I was dating too quickly, that I was making permanent decisions from temporary pain. He also implied that Aiden had been in the picture before the engagement ended. That one wasn't just manipulative. It was sloppy. I didn't meet Aiden until nearly 2 months after Daniel left. My mother called me afterward. I handled it, she said. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What does that mean? It means I told him Destiny doesn't need to trespass, she replied. I closed my eyes for a second and smiled. Thank you. Then came the message that almost worked. 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday. A new number. I've been in an accident. I'm near Lakewood. There's blood. I don't know who else to call. I'm scared. Please. I stared at the screen. And for a split second, just a fraction of a second, my body reacted before my logic could catch up. Because that kind of message isn't designed to inform. It's designed to bypass. But Rachel had warned me. If he escalates, he'll create urgency, she had said. Something that forces you to respond emotionally instead of rationally. So instead of calling him, I called his friend Nate. He picked up on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. Ophelia? Daniel texted me saying he was in an accident, I said evenly. If that's true, you should go. If it's not, tell him this number gets blocked too. There was a pause. Long enough. Then Nate exhaled. He's here. Of course he is. No accident. No blood. Just another attempt to re-enter my life through panic. Rachel was not surprised. By Tuesday, she had enough documentation to file a police report. Repeated unwanted contact. False emergency. Workplace intrusion. Trespassing. Everything was being recorded. Everything was becoming real. Daniel, unfortunately, was still committed to the story he had built. Aiden and I had dinner reservations that Friday. Nothing elaborate. A quiet place in Lohi. Burgers, whiskey, a booth near the window. We were 15 minutes into appetizers when Aiden's expression shifted. Subtle, but enough. He looked past my shoulder. I didn't need to turn around. I already knew. Daniel was standing at the end of our table, perfectly dressed, hair styled, expression controlled just enough to look like heartbreak instead of instability. So this is her, he said. Aiden didn't flinch. One of the many reasons I liked him. I think you should leave, Aiden said calmly. Daniel let out a short, sharp laugh. Of course, he said. The replacement gets the reasonable voice. I stood up. Daniel, leave. He ignored me completely and focused on Aiden. Did she tell you we were engaged? He asked. Did she tell you she walked away from something real because she couldn't handle what it required? Aiden didn't raise his voice. I'm asking you to go, he repeated. Daniel stepped closer. Ophelia, he said, finally looking at me. Look at me. You know this isn't right. We were supposed to get married. You don't replace something like that with this. That word. This, like what I had now, was temporary. Inferior. A placeholder for the life he still believed he owned. I signaled the manager. Daniel saw it and his composure slipped. Just enough. You're really doing this, he said, voice tightening. You're going to throw away Destiny for convenience? That drew attention. Nearby tables went quiet. I felt Aiden's hand lightly touch my back. Grounding. Real. Not dramatic. Just present. And that, more than anything, made something in Daniel snap. He grabbed a glass of red wine from a nearby table. It happened fast. Too fast. The liquid arced across our table, splashing onto Aiden's sleeve, across the edge of my jacket, staining everything it touched. The restaurant went silent. The glass didn't shatter, but it hit hard enough to echo. Daniel pointed at Aiden. You're living in my life, he said. And there it was. Not love, not regret. Ownership. The manager stepped in immediately. Staff moved. Someone called the police. Aiden stayed calm. I gave my statement. So did he. Daniel didn't fight when they asked him to leave. But as they walked him out, he turned once more, eyes locked on mine. This isn't over, he said. For the first time since all of this started, I believed him. And that was exactly why it had to end properly. Not emotionally. Legally. The next morning, Rachel called me before I even had time to finish my coffee. Police report is filed, she said, and I'm submitting for an emergency protective order today. There was no hesitation in her voice. No dramatics. Just process. Just action. And for the first time since Daniel showed up outside my door, I felt something close to relief. Not because it was over, but because it was being handled in a way he couldn't reinterpret. The hearing was scheduled faster than I expected. A week later, I was sitting in a courtroom that smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, watching Rachel organize a stack of documents with the kind of precision I recognized immediately. Tabs, labels, timeline. Everything Daniel had tried to blur into emotion had been broken down into sequence. October, breakup. December, indirect contact through friends. January, staged encounters. February, appearance outside my condo. March, flowers, emails, false emergency. Then the restaurant incident. Every moment he had framed as connection, now read as escalation. Daniel walked in 10 minutes before the hearing started. He was wearing something soft, neutral, deliberate, like he had chosen an outfit meant to signal remorse. His lawyer stood beside him, speaking quietly, occasionally placing a hand on his arm like she was trying to keep him anchored in a version of reality that might hold up under questioning. He didn't look at me right away. When he finally did, it wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was confusion. Like he still couldn't understand how we had ended up here. Like this had all somehow happened to him. The judge entered. We stood, sat, and then it began. His lawyer went first. My client is experiencing emotional distress following the end of a long-term engagement, she said. He is not a threat. He is grieving. He is attempting to communicate with someone he believed he would spend his life with. Grieving. That word again. Rachel didn't interrupt. She waited. Let it settle. Then stood. Grief, she said calmly, does not include repeated unwanted contact after formal notice, false emergency claims, workplace intrusion, trespassing, or public disruption involving property damage. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She walked the judge through the evidence. The emails, the messages, the flowers, the building logs, the cease and desist, the false accident text, the police report, the restaurant footage, frame by frame, moment by moment. There was no narrative in it, no interpretation, just fact. At one point, the judge paused while reading a printed message. I can see your balcony light on. I know you're home. Stop fighting what this is. He looked up, not at me, at Daniel. And for the first time, I saw something shift in the room. Not sympathy, not curiosity. Recognition. Then came the line that ended whatever version of the story Daniel had been telling himself. Destiny is not a legal defense. Silence followed, not dramatic, just final. The judge granted the protective order. 2 years. No contact. No calls. No messages. No gifts. No approaching my home, my workplace, or any place I was known to frequent, including the climbing gym, which Rachel had specifically added after documenting the staged encounters. Violation meant arrest. Simple, clear, unarguable. After the hearing, Daniel stood in the hallway with his lawyer, shoulders slightly collapsed, like something inside him had finally run out of language. His mother stood beside him. She looked tired, not embarrassed, not defensive, just tired. At one point, her eyes met mine, and she gave the smallest nod. Not approval, not apology, just acknowledgement. That was enough. I didn't speak to Daniel. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been documented, submitted, and signed. Life after that didn't transform overnight. It didn't need to. It just continued. My legal bill ended up at $4,850. Annoying. But still significantly cheaper than marrying someone who believed emotional chaos qualified as depth. The wedding losses were what they were. The venue fee, the invitation design, a few miscellaneous deposits. I sold what I could, recovered what I could, and mentally filed the rest under something I now understood clearly. Tuition. Daniel, from what I heard through the same network of people who had once forwarded me his rooftop photos, left his job about a month after the restaurant incident. No one seemed entirely sure whether he quit or was encouraged to. Either way, the explanation didn't matter. Patterns tend to follow people who don't recognize them. He moved back in with his mother, started posting again. Long captions about growth, about karmic cycles, about surviving people who fear deep love. It almost would have been convincing if I hadn't lived the version behind it. Aiden and I didn't rush anything. We didn't define it too quickly. Didn't perform it for anyone else. We just kept showing up. Dinner stayed dinner. Plans stayed plans. There were no tests, no sudden withdrawals disguised as introspection. No emotional puzzles waiting to be solved. One night, a few weeks ago, he stood in my kitchen, opening a cabinet, and paused. You still have that box? He asked. I looked over. He was holding the sample wedding invitation set we had never sent out. I walked over, took it from his hands, and held it for a moment, then walked it to the trash. Dropped it in, closed the lid. And no ghosts, I said. He smiled. And that was it. No speech. No symbolism layered into something bigger than it needed to be. Just a quiet decision. That's what I've learned from all of this. Destiny is not someone leaving you to see if you'll stay loyal to their uncertainty. It's not a loop where one person gets to wander while the other waits. That isn't fate. It's entitlement, dressed up in better language. Real love doesn't require auditions. It doesn't ask you to pause your life while someone else figures out whether you're enough. And if someone tells you they need to walk away to understand your value, believe the part where they walked away. I didn't lose my future. I didn't lose something meant for me. I lost a man who wanted freedom without consequence, and a return policy on my loyalty. And that's not destiny. That's a lesson. And I learned it early enough to still choose something better.